behavior on the part of the Chinese government, presumably as a result of it no longer being under the control of our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party. We explore each of those kinds of topics, I should say, each week, and we're going to do so today against the backdrop of dramatic developments, most recently in the Middle East, specifically Iran, but also to some extent drawing on what has happened in previous months in Venezuela, and what all of that has meant for the Chinese economy, for its strategic plans, and for the threat we face from that quarter. We're going to be exploring specifically the idea that as the Chinese clients in Iran wither, we need to know whither the CCP is going and what that will mean for not only us here in the United States and others in the free world more generally, but also perhaps for the people of China. We're going to start the program with a man who has spent his entire professional life, I think it's fair to say, studying, mastering, and explaining to the rest of us what is going on in the Middle East. His name is Dr. David Wormser. He has a distinguished record of service, both as a naval intelligence officer through the ranks of the Navy. He rose to the position of a lieutenant commander, the rank of lieutenant commander. He has been, in addition, a senior advisor to an undersecretary of state, the national security advisor to the president, and the vice president of the United States in his civilian public service. These days, he runs the Mideast program of the Center for Security Policy, and we are always delighted to have him with us. He, in fact, participated just yesterday in another of our coalitions, the Victory Coalition, and addressed very helpfully some of the developments both on the battlefield in Iran and in the geostrategic environment, if you will, in which that battle is taking place. We've asked him to reprise that for the present purpose, which is to understand not only what's happening in that country, but what it means for communist China and as a result for the rest of us. David Wormser, thank you so much for finding additional time. The floor is yours, sir.
Sure.
Thank you.
I won't go into as much depth about the internal in Iran this time, but let me sort of in a short way describe is that when one looks at the idea of the Islamic Revolution when it took over in 1979, it essentially set itself up, for those of us who study philosophy, Plato's philosopher king, which is essentially a blueprint for a totalitarian dictatorship around an enlightened, more greatly educated, or in the case of a religious context, informed by the wisdom of sort of a divine level of wisdom. And that is what the Islamic Revolution was. It was the embodiment of the 12th Imam's will until he comes back and when his occultation is over. He's been gone over 1,000 years. So it was based on the assumption that he's probably not in a hurry coming back, so that you will recreate this divine structure on earth in his stead, or as his deputy, essentially, channeling the will of the 12th occulted Imam until such time as he returns, which is not imminent. So this establishes this religious totalitarian dictatorship under Sharia law, which is supremacist and so forth. That was Khomeini's view, but because of that, the preservation of the Islamic Republic was the prime objective, because that was the embodiment of the will of the 12th Imam. What you had, though, when Ali Khamenei, I was about to say the current leader, the recently metabolically challenged leader, Ali Khamenei, he represented a shift. And that shift was essentially a crowd that saw in the rise of the Islamic Revolution the signal for the end of times, which is embedded in Shiite thought, that there would be a great conflagration. There would be the great battle between good and evil. Muhammad would be resurrected with an army of martyrs. The martyrs would be resurrected, sort of like in The Lord of the Rings, when the men of the mountain showed up as the army of the dead, essentially, to tip the scale of battle. And they will be led by the returning occulted 12th Imam. The key to this, though, is that the idea was that the Iranians or the Muslims are not passive here. By showing their true faith, they bring about the return of the imam. The more they show their faith, the more the imam is confident that the faith is real and deep and profound, the more likely he will come. And as a result, they will look at every single test of their faith as an opportunity to show the imam, the 12th imam, that now is the time for him to come. Now is the apocalyptic war, the eschatological crisis. And so all of a sudden, this crowd saw the Islamic Revolution as a vehicle for pushing the world, triggering the world toward an eschatological war, an apocalypse. So that is the crowd that Ali Khamenei adopted as his posse in the internal struggles of the Iranian regime. It's a collection of mafias and posses. That was his. Now, he's been in charge for 37 of the last 47 years, which makes him essentially the definer. I mean, the top strata, quite a bit down, all are these Mahdists, these people who believe the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, will return imminently, and that they have to now push it to the apocalyptic culmination so that he comes. So this is a structure that is not going to surrender. This is a structure that is not going to save itself to survive. Now, there may be some. There's also, never underestimate the level of corruption among senior Iranian officials. So there may be one or two or three, I don't know. But the system is not built to surrender. It is not set up for a Japan-like orderly transfer of power and victory to the allies. So we're fighting this to the death of the regime. And we're going to look at something like Ceausescu as more of an example of what may happen here, rather than what Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. Now, what does this mean strategically? Well, Iran, of course, is a critical ally to the Chinese. There was an agreement signed in April 2000, I believe it was April 2000, a strategic cooperation agreement, which turned over Iran's vast intelligence structures, its global network of terror, its entire structure of influence that it had built, over to the Chinese in cooperation. So through that, the Chinese developed quite an access point to major areas of Africa, to South America. All of these are part of this structure that Iran has. And in subversive organizations and structures in Europe. This will continue even when the regime falls. This structure will exist, which is another reason why not only won't this regime survive, we don't want them to surrender. We don't want them to survive in any capacity, because the coming regime in Iran really has to help us now work out this network. We need a cooperative allied government there who will go through the entire archives and find out where this structure is, because it will haunt us. It will be at the disposal of China and of other enemies going forward if we don't track it down and essentially purge the world of it. And we're talking about tens of thousands of operatives around the world, maybe even 100,000. So that's critical. The second critical thing is the flipping of Iran. Right now, what you're seeing is a slow emergence of an alliance between Japan, India, Israel. India, the leader was just in Israel. I know from behind the scenes, the Japanese are pushing and increasingly drawing closer to Israel. The key thing with all three of those is they are ancient cultures. They're trying to adapt that ancient character to modernity, and they're free. And by the way, Greece is really part of it. It's much smaller, but Greece is part of it as well. This is really the League of Rising Ancients, and it's really the southern belt that challenges the Belt and Road, which goes through Iran, connects to Turkey. So this is a major strategic play. And if you flip Iran and becomes free, it is an ancient culture. And if it's free and very talented, if it's free, it will probably adapt to modernity quite well. It sort of assumes this table, a place at the table of this League of Rising Ancients. This is a devastating strategic blow for China. So what we have in Iran, I mean, I could go on for another 10, 20 minutes, but we have in Iran, in my view, a critical pivot point in the larger competition between China and the United States.
David Wormser, thank you. That was splendid. And again, I commend to our audience for more of David's insights into all of this. Please check out the webinar that was conducted yesterday at victoryco.org. We're going to turn next for a perspective from literally the other side of the world, in the Far East. Gamat Lailari, Lieutenant Colonel, Air Force retired, is with us. He is resident in Taiwan these days, and from that forward deployed position has been helping calibrate on how the Chinese Communist Party is pursuing its stated objective of seizing Taiwan at some point. And we wanted very much to begin this conversation about China's response to what is happening in the Middle East, specifically with respect to Iran, again, against the backdrop of what was done as a result of President Trump's intervention in Venezuela a few months ago with the removal of the dictator there, a very close ally of Xi Jinping's, namely Nicolas Maduro. So, Colonel, we're very anxious to get your sense of where things stand at the moment on the mainland, as well as how it might bear on the current threat from China and the prospective one towards the island and people of Taiwan. Welcome back, sir. It's good to have you with us.
Thanks again, Frank, and greetings to all the other speakers and your guests who are listening. So what I wanted to cover briefly were two sort of broad topics. One is the perspective from Taiwan of what China is up to with Iran and in the region during the war in Iran. And then the second part I wanted to cover was sort of two ways of looking at the strategy that the U.S. and Israel are addressing not only regional threats, but global threats, specifically China. And I think it will be useful for sort of synchronizing the context that we're discussing today. So let me focus first on Iran and what China has been doing, and I'm sure our other speakers might chime in on other topics, but we all know that China and Russia have provided arms to Iran, just like China had supported and Russia had supported Hamas during the Israel war, whether through technology transfer or other kinds of training. Another area that is more concerning is the intelligence that they're providing Iran, specifically targeting our military, whether on the ground or at sea, and also probably providing battle damage assessment of these strikes, and also providing intelligence against the Arab countries that Iran is striking. And so this is a kind of interesting dynamic because at the same time that this war is happening, China is buying oil from the Gulf countries and probably providing targeting information for the Iranians for their drones and their missiles. So that's a bit of a paradox. And then another area that is sort of noticed here in Taiwan is the propaganda that's emanating from China regarding the war in Iran and how Iranians are using, Iranian government officials are using the propaganda that China generated. A lot of it's AI. For example, a carrier being destroyed that was used by the Iranians to show that they had successfully, of course this is false, that they successfully sunk a US carrier. What the animation was from China. So there's a lot of propaganda coming from Iran, but also sourced from China. And so this perspective of what's happening is being noticed by people in Taiwan, and obviously in Japan and other places in the Indo-Pacific. But of concern by Taiwan and perhaps other countries nearby on the first island chain is there are people here who are nervous about the numbers of air defense missiles and interceptors that the U.S. is using in this war, and the reduction of about 20% of ground interceptors, THAAD and Patriot, let's say roughly, and roughly 30%, according to open sources, that were expended already in this conflict. I've had to talk to not only my colleagues, but also interviews recently, explaining to them that it is a reduction, but it's not a reduction in capability or intent by the United States should conflict occur in this area. Another area that they're concerned about are the assets that are deployed there. We all know that the USS Lincoln and the Carrier Strike Group departed the Indo-Pacific. And so even though most of the time there's at least one carrier in the region, which is the case currently, there is a carrier currently in Japan, but people here get nervous when things happen and they see American military move to different theaters from this theater. The other point that people bring up is the THAAD unit that was in South Korea that has reportedly been redeployed to the Middle East. And again, I had to explain to them that part of the targeting process that Iran did against U.S. forces and our allies is to take out radars. And again, according to press reports, roughly 3 or 4 TP2 radars, which is THAAD radar, were damaged. That happens to be the radar that I managed for 3 years in Israel during my post-retirement period. And also an ANFPS 132 early warning radar in Qatar, which is worth about $1 billion. So the Iranians later in the war, not the first thing they struck, but later they started striking radars, which are the eyes and ears, let's say, of missile defense systems. And so I explained to them that that's probably the reason why the THAAD is being redeployed, because of that, and also the interceptors are going to be needed in that region. And again, the THAAD radar is not for Taiwan, it's for South Korea. So there's a couple other things happening here. Maybe you've read about it, maybe you haven't, is the PLA has greatly reduced the number of aircraft flying around Taiwan over the last roughly almost 2 weeks to almost zero almost every day, except maybe 1 or 2 days there was a reconnaissance aircraft flying. So these kinds of things get merged together, and they get people concerned about what these indicators are. And of course, the reduction could be in preparation for something. On the other hand, the pattern has been during major conferences that the CCP has in China, which is happening right now. The PLA has historically, since 2021, greatly reduced its flights around Taiwan during these kinds of periods. It's also mentioned that perhaps it was also another factor is the upcoming Trump-Xi meeting at the end of March. And I guess the final other rumor that gets people a little nervous is the fact that recently in Chinese press, not in English press, there was a report that said that actually Xi had actually wanted to attack Taiwan in the summer of 2024. The senior general in the CMC, or the second highest guy, told him no. And of course, later on, he was purged. So all these things are floating around here. And I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the thinking and the topics and the counter arguments that are associated with this current situation with respect to China's involvement with Iran and the war. The second part I'd like to discuss briefly is the strategy. And I've briefly mentioned this a month ago when we were talking in the last one of the last times I was speaking on your show, Frank, is the idea of there's Sun Tzu has everyone refers to Sun Tzu as a grand strategist, and everyone knows his first priority is to win a war without fighting, but most people don't know the second best alternative is to attack your enemy's alliances. And this is exactly what many people here are perceiving the United States is doing, is breaking up the alliance structure that China has developed, invested heavily in Venezuela, in Iran, and let's say Panama Canal. They used to control. I think that's changed recently. So these are strategies to weaken your enemy by attacking their alliances, especially if they're weak alliances. And we all know that China doesn't really have any strong alliances except perhaps with North Korea. And so this is one discussion that I'm having with people here in Taiwan, is the fact that it's possible that the U.S. has a grand strategy, and it's working on it right now. This actually reflects, before the U.S. started doing this kind of thing, actually it reflects what Israel was doing. Again, by attacking the weak alliances. Unfortunately, they had to fight a war against Hamas for 2 years. But once Hamas was taken out and Hezbollah sort of was watching on the sideline, then Hezbollah was taken out. Still a problem for Israel, because at the same time that Israel is fighting Iran, they're also dealing with Hezbollah as we speak. And the Houthis also is another part of the Iranian, let's say, octopus legs. And then finally, in the regional sense, Israel is dealing with Iran, but it couldn't deal with Iran until it had to take out those terrorist groups that would have pounded Israel if Israel went initially against Iran. So I think the U.S. and Israel are now strategically aligned in the common effort against Iran. But I think on the U.S. side, the grand strategy for the U.S. is global and more referencing a China-type attacking the alliances. Now, this also correlates with a U.S. strategy that was developed by the Boston police in the 1990s against crime groups. The Boston police used the concept that was later called focused deterrence by focusing on elements of crime groups that were conducting violence, causing 60% of the deaths by 1% of these individuals inside these crime groups, these gangs. And what the Boston police did was they focused on each gang and the individuals specifically involved in the violence and applying levers, pressure, threats of arrest, long jail sentences to curb the violence. And what the Boston police did was they addressed one gang at a time until eventually the crime and the death rates and the murder rates in Boston greatly were reduced. And so in the same way, you might say that Sun Tzu and this focused deterrence concept is being played out by Israel and by the United States to deal with the threat of these violent actors against our interests, not only in the Middle East, but in the case of Venezuela and in Latin America and other places. So I think I've laid out briefly my two thoughts on this matter. And if others have questions or comments about what I said, I would look forward to responding to them.
Well, good. I know that you have got a late night on your hands at the moment, Gemont, and that you've got an early morning. So if you have to scoot, this is a very, very helpful intervention. And I know some of the comments that are coming up will both respond to it and build upon it. So thank you for joining us, and stick around if you can. We're going to go next to Captain James Fennell, United States Navy, another distinguished military veteran who has served with great distinction, as it happens, as did David Wurmser, in the Naval Intelligence part of the U.S. Navy. He is a retired captain and has been continuing to serve our country handsomely in his post-Navy service as a commentator, as well as a fantastic resource for all of us trying to track what the Chinese are saying and doing, notably through a wonderful Google group called Red Storm Risen. His Red Star Risen, excuse me, I keep getting that wrong. Captain Fennell is a senior fellow with the Geneva Center for Security Policy and the co-author with Dr. Bradley Thayer of a very important book, Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. You can also follow his work at American Greatness. Captain, welcome aboard once again. It's great to have you with us. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Frank. Good to be with you and all the folks that are on the webinar today. Great opening two presentations from Mr. Wurmser and G-Man. My comments, I'll focus, the state of the war. I think for those may not have yet a chance to see there on the East Coast, the CENTCOM posted a 5-minute video from the CENTCOM commander again this morning, giving an update on the status of the war. And so if you just follow CNN or BBC, you may not get you may get a biased view of what the conflict is going on right now in terms of focusing on the results of indiscriminate Iranian missile firings and drone attacks against civilian centers. There's a lot of attention on that, or the report of 3 ships being struck in and around the Strait of Hormuz in the last 24 hours. But if you focus, because we're not getting a lot of BDA, bomb damage assessment, in terms of the kind of volumes of information because of operational security, we're just getting these few snippets. But if you look at the strategic trend line over 11 days, we've struck over, as the Admiral said, 5,500 targets, just the U.S. alone. And then add in our allies from Israel, and the number of targets goes up. And we're really making progress against the 4 categories of targets that the president laid out on the first day of this conflict. And why is that all important to the Committee on Present Danger China? It's because for 47 years, the U.S. has been essentially, and especially the Navy, we have been tied to this constant deployments to the Arabian Gulf, the Persian Gulf. I made them in my career. I spent time in Riyadh in 1994, 4 months. as part of a joint task force looking at what Saddam was doing. But underneath all of that was the Iranian threat. And we've had to divert our carriers over the years and chew up a lot of our naval forces' operational readiness and maintenance funds, which affects the long-term maintenance and life of those platforms. And by having to send them constantly being on duty station out there. During the wars, if you go back to Desert Storm, we had up to 6 carriers there. During Operation Enduring Freedom, we had 5 carriers there. We have had, at times throughout all those 47 years, we've had a 1.0 and a 2.0 presence requirement for carriers in and around the Gulf in the CENTCOM 5th Fleet area of responsibility. And throughout all those last 35 years, as we've watched the PRC's military prepare itself and rise up and build up the largest Navy in terms of number of ships and the largest Air Force in Asia, potentially even the largest Air Force in the world now, certainly one of the largest strategic rocket force and other capabilities, military capabilities. We've watched this occur, and there's been many of us inside the U.S. War Department and the Defense Department were warning that we shouldn't have to, be so distracted from what's going on in the Middle East, to the sense that it was making us less prepared and less ready for a conflict in what is really a different kind of geographic area. Even in this operation against Iran, the Strait of Hormuz is only 20 miles wide, and the Gulf is quite contained. If we talk about a conflict with China in the Far East, it's a naval arena, great swaths of water, huge blue sea areas where the conflict will largely initially be fought at Navy against Navy, war at sea. And so we were focused on land warfare, which made us not prepare ourselves for the kind of warfare that could come to us if China decides to act against Taiwan or against Japan or against the Philippines or who else in the region, and especially us. So that diversion, while necessary for all the reasons that have been laid out by the president and his team and his associates, I think right now, as somebody that's been an advocate for focusing our military in Asia, it's really important that we finish this job. We destroy, or as I've been saying, declaw or defang the Iranian regime. Mao said that a nation only can, the party controls the gun. So the Communist Party of China essentially lays their claim to power through this threat of violence. Well, it's no different from the Iranian regime in Tehran. They have controlled Iran for 47 years through the use of force, both against their neighbors, against America, against Israel, but also internal police and security forces terrorizing their own citizens. And so we have to declaw the Iranian regime's ability to do that, and then allow the Iranian people to stand up and make their own decision. And whatever that is, as long as that tiger in Iran, or that lion, whatever you want to call it, as long as those claws and fangs are removed, then it's going to be much, much harder for them to survive and maintain a jackboot over those people. And when that happens, America's constant deployments to the Mideast and this large number of platforms and ships can now get back to the Pacific. G-Man mentioned a couple of things. The THAAD, the Theater High Area Air Defense Battery, that is now confirmed to have left South Korea. That is one issue where we have been doing that over the years, managing what they call high demand, low density assets. And so right now, given the posture of the Iranians' indiscriminate missile firings and drone firings, we're moving around these resources to ensure the protection of our own forces and those of our allies in the region. That doesn't mean that it's a free hand for China to operate right now in the Western Pacific or North Korea. One of the things that's really important, an indicator for your audience, this audience to watch, is the actual location of our 4 deployed aircraft carrier. It's right now the USS George Washington. She has remained in the Western Pacific, home ported in Yokosuka, Japan, and she is the duty carrier that is out there to provide that first line of conventional deterrence against China and North Korea, and Russia for that matter, in the Far East. And given the performance of our carriers over the last 11 days, I think that deterrence statement is much greater. Maybe now it has more efficacy than it did before this conflict. I think China may not have really appreciated the volume of ordnance that our aircraft carriers can generate. And as Admiral Cooper said this morning in his video, we were launching strikes every hour yesterday. And we've been doing that every day for 11 days. Every hour we're launching combat aircraft loaded with ordnance from our carriers against Iran. That's the kind of fight that we can bring to the PRC should they decide to do something. So I think in that sense, it's a deterrent signal, and I'm very pleased to see the administration keep the George Washington there. And to give you a context, we established the United States of America established a 4 deployed carrier presence in the Vietnam War area. After that, essentially after Vietnam, we kept the carrier in the Far East. And we started home porting one in Japan in the 80s. And throughout the 80s until 2003, that carrier always remained in the Western Pacific. Then during Operation Enduring Freedom, the USS Kitty Hawk in 2001 2002 deployed out to the Gulf. It took off half of the Air Wing 5, left it ashore in Japan, and then they used Army Special Operations Forces in the Gulf to operate from the Kitty Hawk in the operations against Afghanistan. There were a lot of people at that time, because I was at U.S. Pacific Fleet headquarters and in the Pentagon, that were not happy that President Bush moved the Kitty Hawk from Japan out to the Gulf. And it was basically, it happened, and then they said, that's it, we're never going to do that again. So here we are 23 years later, and through both Democrat and Republican presidents, the Pentagon has been able to convince and indicate to the leaders, regardless of their party, that it was not a good idea to take the carrier that's out there, because that would really be the signal to China that we're not really serious about Asia. So a THAAD battery or a PAC 2 or 3 battery here or there, we'll deal with that as we shuffle and move those smaller interceptors around. But the carrier staying there is the signal to Beijing that the United States of America is not looking the other way and is not distracted. We have other carriers on the West Coast. We have other capabilities. I wish we had a lot more. I'm a big advocate for growing the Navy. But for now, what is most important is to finish this job in Iran so that then we can start not having our resources diverted out to the Gulf anymore, because there won't be any threat there from a physical presence. There'll still be individual small events and terrorist cells maybe that we'll still have to go after, but we won't need an aircraft carrier to shoot down ballistic missiles and drones and aircraft and ships of that nature. And it'll take some time. It's not going to be a night and a flip a switch thing here. We still have a couple of weeks left, in my opinion. That's up to the president. But I think, given his stated goals, we're gonna finish this job and make sure that Iran has no ability to hit us today, and as Admiral Cooper said, into the future. So, and that will then free us up to focus on the main thing, which is the Chinese Communist Party, and stop them from doing what Russia's done against Ukraine, or what Iran's done and its proxies in the region out there in CENTCOM. We don't want to go to a war in Asia. So we have to have overwhelming conventional and nuclear deterrent capability. So with that, I think I'll sign off, and thanks for having me on, Frank.
Captain Fennell, let me just simply say in closing, thank you both for participating, of course, today, but for your clarity on this point. You are I like to think the keeper of the flame when it comes to the main thing, as you were just recalling, namely the threat we face from the Chinese Communist Party. It is the focus of this coalition, the Committee on the Present Danger of China, of which you are a very important member. But I think your being able to help the rest of us recognize the relevance of what is happening in this fight in Iran at the moment to ensuring that we successfully deter and ultimately defeat the Chinese Communist Party is of surpassing importance, sir. So I thank you for doing it here and elsewhere as well. God bless you. Have following seas, my friend. We're going to turn next to an interview that was conducted very recently by a great friend of the committee and the work that it does, Jan Jekulek of Epoch Times. He is the host of an absolutely superb television program produced by Epoch Times that is called American Thought Leaders. And as it happens, he just featured in a wonderful interview with one of them, a man that I'd hoped would be contributing to this program today, but couldn't do it otherwise. So with the permission of both Jan and Gordon Chang, the subject of that interview, we've excerpted a brief part of it for this purpose. There's much, much more where it came from, and we were not able to, either for time reasons or just under the circumstances, grab more of it. But I really urge everyone in this audience to take a look at the full interview between Gordon and Jan, and most importantly, immediately take aboard the contribution that we're able to make, again, with their help, to the present topic, which is what is the implication of all of what's happening in Iran for the Chinese Communist Party and the threat that it poses to us. So let's go to that videotape now.
If you look, for instance, at the national security strategy, it's very clear that China is a high priority. It may not be the number one priority, which is the Western Hemisphere, but if you look through that short document, it's clear that China is foremost in President Trump's mind. So, for instance, towards the end of it, it talks about how the United States must not allow any hostile power, the phrase that it uses, to either close off the South China Sea or impose tolls on traffic over or on the South China Sea. Well, there's only one country that fits that description, that has that ambition and has that power. So that's true when you look through the entire document. I believe that President Trump is going after the Chinese, and he's not doing it directly, but he is doing it indirectly, and he's cutting off their sources of support. Oil, for instance. Venezuela supplies maybe 3 to 4% of China's imported oil. But Iran was somewhere between 15 and 23%, depending on the year. And that's important because when you put those two numbers together, you get a significant portion of China's imported oil has now been taken off the board. Yeah. President Trump may allow the Venezuelans to sell oil to China, but not at the heavily discounted rates that China was benefiting from. And Chinese factories are now dependent on cheap oil. Well, they're not getting it anymore. If they get their oil, they're going to have to pay market prices.
Also, just to add to that, Venezuelan and Iranian oil imports for China were actually settled in RMB, which most people are not willing to do.
Yes. I mean, who wants a currency that is not a hard one? You know, when people have a choice, they want the stronger currency. Now, Venezuela and Iran might have been forced to take a cheap currency because they didn't have very much choice. But now they're going to get that choice. And that means that they're going to have to start paying dollars again. There won't be peace in the Middle East or even the wider world until we get rid of that regime. That regime has declared itself to be an enemy of the United States. Matter of fact, the Iranian president in December actually came out and said it. He said, we're in a state of war with the United States. But we have these Iranian death squads that are running around the United States. We know the Iranians turned off a water system in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, not too long ago. Iran in the past has killed Americans. They worked very hard against it. And we know what they did against Israel on October 7th. So, yes, the Iranian regime has to go. It had a nuclear weapons program. It's got ballistic missiles. It is a danger to the international community. And it has killed thousands and almost certainly tens of thousands executed Iranian prisoners over the last 5 or so weeks. So I believe that we have to get rid of the Iranian regime. We can't keep on saying, oh, it's unacceptable for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, or it's unacceptable for the Iranian regime to execute tens of thousands of its own citizens, and then not do anything. So bravo to President Trump for doing this. There are times when presidents have to do what is absolutely necessary to protect the American public. You go back to Tocqueville, talked about how democracies are very slow to recognize threats, very slow to go to war. And that's true. We've had a string of political scientists who have told us that, and that's absolutely true. We ignored Osama bin Laden. We ignored him after he killed 6 Americans by bombing the North Tower of the World Trade Center in February 1993. We ignored him until one day when he reached out and killed 2,977 Americans. And then we said, well, how did that happen? Well, that's the nature of our democracy. And yes, I understand that it is unpopular. But that's the way we end up in situations where many Americans get killed. World War II in Europe could have been avoided if Britain and France had exerted their power in 1936 and stopped the Third Reich from remilitarizing the Rhineland. So we know that tens of millions died because Britain and France could not rouse themselves to do what was absolutely necessary. Well, we're the Britain and France of this century until, of course, President Trump decided, no, we were not going to allow these threats to gather. And I think that this is a profiles encouraged moment for the president.
Amen. Thank you both to Gordon and to Jan Jekulek for enabling us to benefit from those insights. We're going to hear from another of our forward deployed military veterans, another very important member of this committee, as well as a very faithful contributor to these programs, despite the fact that we're on the other side of the world and all those time zones away. His name is Colonel Grant Newsham, United States Marine Corps retired. He has served as well our government as a foreign service officer in our embassy in Tokyo. He has been a businessman there for many years. He has probably as acute an understanding of what the Chinese Communist Party is up to and how in particular it bears upon our allies and interests and security in the Western Pacific. From that vantage point in Japan, Colonel Newsham is the author of a best-selling book entitled When China Attacks, A Warning to America. You can follow his extraordinarily important work at the Center for Security Policy, of which he is a senior fellow. Grant, it's wonderful to have you. Thank you for staying up for the purposes of contributing to this program, and we're very interested in your perspective on what's been said and what needs to be. Over to you, sir.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Frank. It's not been a good few months for the People's Republic of China. They've lost their main proxy in Latin America, Venezuela. Now their main proxy in the Middle East that gives them influence, the ability to subvert, gives economic benefits. Now Iran is in trouble as well. This is not looking good for them. And one way to just sort of calibrate this so anybody can understand is put yourself in the other guy's position. Suppose China was doing this to our best friends in a very important region, just freely hammering them every day, destroying their military, and ideally destroying the people who need destroyed. And there's really nothing that they can do about it. And particularly, and suppose we had sold them the air defenses and provided them with weapons and had promised them we had a comprehensive strategic partnership. Well, that wouldn't look very good. We would not be feeling very happy with ourselves. And that's the position the Chinese are in at the moment. However, is this couched by the mainstream media, etc. This is not good for China. But despite all of this, China's objectives haven't changed. Despite the losses and setbacks in Venezuela and in Iran, they still intend, just in their immediate neighborhood, to really seize Taiwan at some point, to get Taiwan, also to dominate Japan, to humiliate Japan, teach them a lesson, seize Japanese territory as well. Additionally, they fully intend to dominate control Northeast Asia and the rest of Asia as well, and that's just for starters. So that really hasn't changed at all. And this is not just something that is theoretical. They're particularly their desire for global domination, and that they're putting the pieces of that together, particularly from a military standpoint. It's just one part of it. They're investing heavily in just a huge navy. They're putting out ships much, much faster than we do, say 6-to-1, aircraft as well. And they're building, notably, a lot of these replenishment ships that you need for global operations, and long-range transports as well. I wish we could crank them out the way that they are. Additionally, they're putting the physical infrastructure in place, the ports, the airfields throughout the world that give them the access that will allow the People's Liberation Army to operate. Will this happen tomorrow? No. 5-10 years, though, wait and watch and see what happens. And this is despite the immediate setbacks, as I said, in Iran and Venezuela. Additionally, outer space as well within their reach, and they are up there. Additionally, and even more troubling, we've always had an ace in the hole with our submarine fleet. There was a hearing that was held in Washington just a week ago, and it highlighted the efforts China is making in the undersea warfare realm, and it was alarming. And these were good intelligence officers, very senior ones, some from the U.S. Navy, who pointed out that our lead is not going to last all that much longer if things stay the way they are. So one really shouldn't underestimate the Chinese threat here. So here's something to watch out for, and that is, with Iran, we don't know what's coming. This is still early. The war's only been going on about 8 or 9 days, maybe. And if it ends with the Iranian regime gone, then that's going to be really good. And a lot of good things will happen. If it ends with the regime still in place, well, for China, that's going to actually look pretty good. That's even going to look very good for China. Because one thing that's going to happen if we do not prevail is that the domestic blowback on the Trump administration is going to be such that nobody is going to be very interested in a fight in the Pacific, no matter how much people like me and others on the show would like it. It's going to be very hard for an American administration to really commit itself to an all-out fight against a major enemy in the Pacific. So we still have to wait and see how this plays out, but the Chinese watch it very closely. One thing that has pushed them back and surprised them is this demonstration of will. They are always looking at the will, the backbone of their intended victims, their enemies. And the Americans have surprised them, particularly starting last June when they went after Iran, then Venezuela, and now Iran once again. And now we'll see how much what the effects of this will are as well. And I've just laid out, of course, the military, the kinetic threat that still remains from the Chinese. But they have all, regardless of what's happened in the last few months, they have been engaged in an aggressive, systematic, widespread political warfare effort against the United States, the free world, and even the unfree world over the last 40 years that has been incredibly effective. This is in Asia, the Pacific Islands, where they are firmly ensconced, and that's our rear area if we are going to defend against the first island chain. They're very influential there, and it doesn't get in. They're not letting up. Latin America, same thing, despite our recent successes in Panama and parts of Central America. Africa and Europe the same way. You wonder why why we don't seem to have so many allies in Europe. Well, that's partly Chinese successful political warfare. In the political warfare, even in the United States, you can't overstate this. They only killed 40,000 Americans last year with Chinese fentanyl, the total figures of well over 800,000. Additionally, you wonder, why can't we do anything about Chinese land purchases, farmland purchases, their domination of the so-called marijuana industry? Why do we have Chinese researchers in just about all of our laboratories? And we can't do anything about it. Well, that's successful Chinese political warfare. So we've had a couple of good weeks. Iran's looking good, but there's a long way to go there. And at the end of the day, President Trump, hopefully he finishes it, because if he declares victory and it ends with really the Iranian regime intact, beaten up pretty badly, well, that will be not a good thing, and a lot of bad things will come with that. So the Chinese are watching this very closely, just as closely as we are. But it's still I think it's still too early to call, and the Chinese threat remains undiminished, regardless of what happens in Iran. So thanks very much, Frank.
Colonel, thank you. And again, just incredibly important level setting on both the setbacks that the Chinese are experiencing at the moment, as well as the prospect that should we terminate hostilities short of a decisive victory over this regime, it will redound to the benefit not only of the jihadis most immediately involved, of course, in Iran, but also their most important allies, the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to turn, as we often do, for the role of cleanup batter in these programs, to our leader, Brian T. Kennedy, the chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger of China. He is a past president of the Claremont Institute and present president of the American Strategy Group, the author of numerous books, including China's War in America, I believe is the name of it, an encounter book. He is a prolific author. Blaze TV has got a very important piece recently on the need for a nationalized approach to election integrity. Brian Kennedy, I don't envy you having to synthesize, as you do so well, this important set of presentations, but I don't know of anybody better to do it. So with your own comments added, of course, as well, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Frank. This has been an important show, and I agree with everything that everyone has said. We're, as you can tell, mostly in agreement about all these things. I'm actually coming out with a new piece tomorrow in the American Mind about this, and it was really all about why attack Iran now. And it really is because something you and we've talked about before on the show. Iran has the ability to, with Chinese help, to be capable of launching a ballistic missile against the United States. Now, President Trump has said Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. Now, why does he say that? Well, because even though they don't have an intercontinental ballistic missile that can reach the United States, they do have the ability to launch a ship-launched ballistic missile against the United States. And as I argue in this latest piece, Frank, the Iranians in the early 2000s practiced in the Caspian Sea the ability to launch a ballistic missile from a ship and to explode a test warhead in the high atmosphere to simulate an electromagnetic pulse attack that wouldn't be useful at all for any of their neighbors, because the spread of the EMP blast would hit too many people and it wouldn't achieve their strategic objective. The purpose of an EMP type attack is against the United States. It's the ultimate asymmetric attack against us. They practiced it twice in the Caspian Sea, and we had to take that seriously. A few years later, President Ahmadinejad said he could envision a world without America and Israel. And he said, pray God, we can make it so. And what he was referring to was this capability of theirs. Now, they've been working on their missile design and their nuclear warheads and their nuclear program ever since then. As a matter of high government policy, China and Russia believed that Iran and North Korea should have this capability. Much of the work, let's just say, that Iran performed on their nuclear warhead design was in North Korea, using Russian and Chinese scientists to help them. And so again, as a matter of high government policy, China wanted Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Now, why? Well, if there was ever a conflict between China and the United States and nuclear weapons had to be used, what better way to use Iran as a proxy? Iran, who hates the United States anyway, what better way than to use Iran as a proxy against the United States to be able to launch a ballistic missile off the coasts of the United States, one of the coasts of the United States, and to explode a nuclear-tipped EMP weapon over the United States. If you do that, you can destroy the electronic infrastructure of the United States. And under that scenario, our own EMP Commission, the United States EMP Commission, said that the United States only had the industrial capacity to provide enough water, food, medicine, etc., for about 30 million people, and we're a country today of 350 million people. Now, it sounds like something out of science fiction or a bad movie or something that could never happen. But this was the strategic nuclear doctrine of Iran to be able to do that. They've been assisted in producing such a weapon by communist China. In 2024, the Iranians tested another ballistic missile launch. They were using their Desful missile, I believe, but they also have a Sigil missile. The Desful was like 1,000 kilometers. The Sigil is like 2,000 kilometers. And they tested that again aboard a ship called the Shahad Madavi. And they didn't test they didn't do an EMP attack test simulation, as far as I can tell, but they did test the ability to launch a missile from a ship. This is their stated doctrine. They've not produced long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. The explicit strategy of Iran is to produce these medium-range ballistic missiles that can do what I described. Those missiles today could attack either with an EMP attack or attack Los Angeles or San Francisco or Washington or Miami or New York or any of our major cities, anywhere, pick a major city of the United States that they could try to attack. The idea that we would allow Iran to have that capability is irresponsible. We cannot today stop a single missile that is launched that way. I should add, we can't stop a single Russian or communist Chinese ballistic missile either. Our current system is designed to stop some North Korean missiles. That system is not perfect either. But the idea that we would allow Iran to have the capacity to launch a ship-launched ballistic missile is simply irresponsible on our part. The idea that we haven't hardened our grid against these kind of attacks is irresponsible. And I mention all this because in the context of everything that everybody else has been talking about, we're degrading Iran, certainly. But if we're successful here in Iran, we will also have taken that proxy capability away from communist China. If we are ever attacked from a ship-launched ballistic missile, again, assuming we're successful, we will be able to tell the communist Chinese in advance that we know that that kind of an attack is either coming from you, Communist China, Russia, or North Korea, and that we will retaliate in kind. And so simply in terms of when we talk about degrading Communist China's capabilities, taking a proxy like Iran off the table is a very, very useful thing for the United States. The president has said we believe in unconditional surrender when it comes to Iran. What he really means is he wants to make sure they don't have that nuclear capability, and that we have a regime in Tehran that believes it is suicidal to go around attacking America. Not only with this excursion, as the president said, into Iran, will we be able to achieve that, but we will send a signal to the Iranian regime that you simply cannot kill Americans with impunity. Our job here is not to, as much as we would like regime change, that's a very difficult task. But if in the process of what we're doing in Iran, we can take that nuclear capability fully off the table, I don't believe we did so last summer with Operation Desert Hammer. I mean, the fact that the Iranians said they already have enough nuclear materials for 11 missiles is evidence of that. But if we can fully take this off the table and take Iran off the table as a proxy, a nuclear proxy of Communist China, I think this war will have been well worth it, and something that I applaud President Trump for having done. I think Grant, Colonel Newsham is absolutely right. There's a long way to go here, but I think we're on the right track. It's a war. None of this is going to be easy. And I would say, Frank, that it's very difficult to fight wars in this modern age of, artificial intelligence, deep fakes, what have you. And it's also hard to fight a war when it comes to looking every single day at death tolls. That we're doing what we're doing in Iran for the security of the United States first and foremost. And pray God that our president has the resolve, which I fully believe he does. And God bless our troops who are in harm's way over there. So thank you, Frank.
Amen. Brian, thank you. Very important contribution to the program. We've got time for, I think, one round of questions, and I very much appreciate those of you who are still with us to take them on if you can. David Wormser, you've both set the predicate for this conversation very nicely yourself, but you've heard what others have been saying. Can you speak to this question of the likelihood that at the end of the day, we'll see the Chinese Communist Party itself as a result of what we hope will be the completion of this effort to permanently achieve an end of the threat from the Iranian mullahocracy. And very much hope that will include, of course, the liberation of the people of Iran. But to what extent, David, can you say, is this a preoccupation of the Chinese they may themselves face? Difficulty in maintaining the kind of totalitarian control of their own people that has characterized their time since 1949.
It's a great question, Frank. Look, totalitarianism really the most repressive regimes of any sort rely on several things. One, of course, is an image of omnipotence, solidity, brutality. Whenever, and generally this mood that of the era, that is the way of government, that is the most solid form of government. So we have these periods in which, for example, during the Cold War, where the solidity of the Soviet Union seemed unquestioned, And as a result, it gnawed away at the idea that freedom is the best form of governance, and gave sort of an era in this decolonialization of the 50s and 60s. It gave an impetus to the various forms of government that surrounded a Soviet model. Whether it's what is it, Nkrumah and so forth. We had all over the world this wave of essentially totalitarian or socialist or semi-fascist governance in the 50s, 60s, and so forth, largely because it seemed that despite the victory of World War II, that the Soviet Union was ascendant. So when the Soviet Union fell in 1989, it was a shock to Beijing, and it led directly to Tiananmen. It also led to a period, or bounced off a period, of tremendous flourishing of more freedom in Latin America. So really freedom on some level, this image, this era, this mood toward freedom or away from freedom is indivisible in the world. And if the Iranians have played an incredibly important part in 1979 to damage that world, and now to indict this idea that the solidity and the success of the challenge to the West is the way to go. We see across the Middle East over the last decade under Obama, this wave of ideas that, well, we shouldn't really be allies with America. Not that we like America, they're nice people and so forth, but the future is China. The future is the power of China. They're the rising superpower. Their technology is superior. Their military can bury the United States. Their system produces things better than ours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you saw the entire region drifting toward China. And here is one of China's most important allies, fielding some of its most important weaponry, for example, the air defense systems in this round. It doesn't look too good. And moreover, the strategic, China looks unable to protect a critical ally here. It doesn't have global force protection capabilities the way the United States does. And this is now becoming apparent with the collapse of Iran. So first of all, you have this era which could indict the government of Cuba, could indict the government of China and lead directly to sort of a fervor of freedom that challenges the governments. But second of all, their brand globally has now just been severely damaged. Then you have the technical issues, which is oil, that they have been underselling us and competing with us by getting discount oil from Iran. That'll be gone, as one of the panelists have said. I would also add natural gas. Same thing. The fact that there is a monopoly of natural gas that keeps prices up, that was anchored to Qatar, it helped a lot strategically China because it kept Turkey afloat. Qatar was weakening the West. It tried to portray itself as a Western ally. But the truth was it was through the Muslim Brotherhood and so forth, and its subversive activities across the globe. Qatar was actually working more closely aligned with Chinese interests. Well, Qatar now will face a tremendous challenge with Iranian gas opening up. It's the only other competing monster size gas fields. And it will take some while to develop it. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not something that will happen next month. It'll take a year or two or three. But in the end, China will find itself unable to access cheap oil the way it has. And its key ally in the region that has been destroyed, Iran, but the second thing is it's sort of a passive ally, the Qataris, undermining and destabilizing, will lose one of their critical assets that fund this weakening of the West. So I think strategically the Chinese are facing a meltdown in addition to this sort of the intangible wave of freedom versus tyranny.
David, thank you. Grant Newsom, you spoke of military buildup, in particularly naval forces, that the Chinese have engaged in. Captain Fennell, who's now left us, made a point about the importance of the carrier, the USS George Washington, being on station and a deterrent force. I know you have been very, very forthright about your concerns that China is putting into place the means of engaging in warfare against, yes, Taiwan, but perhaps our vital interest in the region more broadly, and us here at home as well. Could you just give us a quick sense of whether there is, in your mind, a serious danger that, with all of the things that we've talked about here and the downsides for China and so on, this might nonetheless be seen by them, the George Washington notwithstanding, as a time to, as you put it in your book, when China attacks?
Yes, you've really got to worry about this. China looks very closely at the state of affairs in the United States. If they see a United States that's chaotic, divided, and has been burned, and they read popular opinion very well, they understand our political system. If they see that in the United States either can't intervene effectively, then Taiwan looks to be an extremely juicy target for them. And they have got the resources to think that they have a good shot at taking the place if they have to. And keep in mind that a military only has to be able to do a certain thing at a certain place at a certain time. So while we have to cover the globe, China just has to focus on this one place, this one thing, which is Taiwan. And they spent 50 years putting together a force to do it. And I think they think that they've got one that can do it. And a lot depends on what goes on in the United States over the next few months. And it could be that if it appears that, say, the administration is handcuffed, weakened, assuming a worst case outcome from our perspective, best case outcome from China's perspective, they just might think, well, Americans aren't going to be able to do much, so here we go.
And again, you've done yeoman work, as have others on our committee, of describing. You did a little bit in the course of this program, of course, the political warfare that the Chinese are engaged in to try to make sure that there are those fault lines and that they're fracturing the American, body politic, and the use of TikTok, among other instruments, to promote their narratives and their prospects of defeating us. Either pre-kinetically through the unrestricted warfare practice on steroids, or possibly the kinetic kind. Colonel, thank you so much. Brian, finally to you. You and I have been beating this drum about the need for missile defense for a very long time. I fear that there actually have been some long-range capabilities that the Iranian regime has been putting into place as well. I know, of course, of their space launch capabilities, as well as I think I've seen reports of a 10,000 nautical mile ranged missile that they tested before this all went down. Could you just complete our conversation here by discussing a little bit, in addition to the importance of victory over the Iranians, decisive victory, I pray, of the president's plan for putting into place what he calls the Golden Dome, to mitigate the threat from this quarter, and yes, from the Chinese as well as the Russians to boot.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. The Golden Dome is still in its infancy. The president very much believes in national missile defense, and this is one of the reasons he wanted Greenland, because he thinks there are some key components of the Golden Dome that he could cite there. But as you and I have advocated for many years, you need missile defense in a variety of ways. You need it land-based, sea-based, air-based, and space-based. You need a multi-layer missile defense that's capable of handling all of these threats to us. But we're in our early days, and we're simply not there yet when it comes to defending the American homeland from these attacks. I will say, I think the Iranians may well want to develop very long-range ballistic missiles. The problem with long-range ballistic missiles is you have to have enough of them to engage in nuclear war fighting. And of course, the Chinese and the Russians do. They also have certainly the Russians do, submarine launch capabilities. But if if they only have a few missiles and they launch them from the territory of Iran against the United States, we'll know where exactly it came from and we'll retaliate in kind.
Yes.
And eventually we'll have the missile defenses to stop that kind of threat, or a sea-launched threat, the way I described. It's what we're doing today that concerns me the most. Today, Iran has the capability, if they don't already have a nuclear warhead, they have the capability to launch it from a ship, to sink that ship off the coast of the United States after they launch that missile and destroy effectively, if not all of the United States, much of the United States. That seems to me the thing we should be focusing on today, because when we talk about political warfare, so many folks on our side dismiss the nuclear threat as, well, we've been hearing about this for years, it never happened, they've never attacked us, and they're never going to attack us. And this is all just more propaganda to get us into a war. I don't think that's, one, I don't believe that's true. I believe they do have this capability. They've demonstrated that capability, and their allies in communist China, Russia, and North Korea certainly have that capability. The idea they wouldn't have that capability seems irresponsible for us to believe. We have to believe that they have that capability. And President Trump, when he says they can't have a nuclear weapon, had that in mind. Whatever way they could deploy it against the United States, he was simply not going to have it. The Golden Dome is unfortunately years away from being fully effective. But in the meantime, to the extent that we can degrade that nuclear capability, that's an extremely important thing. And I think part of our job here on the committee is to explain to our countrymen why that nuclear threat is real. They're developing it for a reason. And on top of all that, Iran has developed a hatred for the United States since 1979 that simply cannot be overlooked. They seized our embassy, a textbook act of war. They took our people hostage. They killed the Marines in Lebanon in 1983. They killed Americans with roadside bombs. The idea that Iran does not have hatred and contempt for the United States is simply untrue. They have it in spades, as it were. And it's only a question of time before they use these really lethal devices against us. And the idea that President Trump was going to let America be held hostage that way or vulnerable that way was simply unacceptable. And I think we really need to, beyond the geostrategic parts of all this, we need to highlight the immediate threat, because I believe it was imminent and the president believes it's imminent. But I don't think the administration has done an adequate job explaining that to the American people. And I think one purpose of these webinars is to help do so. So thank you.
Indeed it is, Brian, and thank you for that important observation. Let me just say in closing myself, I think that what we have as a further reason to be concerned about the imminent nature of the threat that we faced from Iran, at least before Operation Epic Fury and the Israeli component of it as well, is that it is entirely possible that the Iranians were not simply beavering away at building nuclear weapons with all that that entails, much of which had been at least reduced in capability, if not destroyed outright, but have simply bought one or more of these devices and could conceivably have used them in the way that Brian's talking about, or perhaps against Israel or others in their region. The point that David made at the very beginning, David Wormser, I think is so vital to recall here. This is a regime that not only hates America, I think we've established that beyond any doubt, but that believes its destruction can bring about the apocalypse and with it the ushering in again of the golden age of Islam. That is a prospect that I believe the president very properly responded to decisively. I pray that he has greatly diminished the ability of this mullahocracy to pursue further that option. The necessity of ensuring that they cannot continue to pursue it in the future, especially to be further emboldened by doing so, to do so, by their survival in even a much diminished state of this conflict, is something that I think argues both in its own right and certainly in terms of what it would mean for communist China, emboldening it to carry on in its own designs on the Pacific and the rest of the world, for that matter, as well as what it would do for our vital interests in the Middle East. These are all factors that I believe lead in the course of this webinar, as in the course of yesterday's with the Victory Coalition, to the conclusion that decisive victory, the end of the mullahocracy, the liberation of the people of Iran, and the freeing of our own people from the kind of threat that the Iranians have been rhetorically describing for decades and seemingly were prepared to try to actualize, is the stuff that I think justified the action taken and the necessary completion of the job. As Captain Fennell said, finish the job. I want to thank all of our contributors to this program, Dr. David Wormser, Lieutenant Colonel Hilary, Captain Fennell, Gordon Chang, Colonel Newsham, and Brian Kennedy for extraordinarily important comments and for your respective contribution to the fight we're in. God bless you all. God bless all of you in our audience. I hope you will help us disseminate this important product and that God will bless America. Over and out.